All right, I'd like to call our meeting to order and welcome everyone again this evening. I will pass on the land acknowledgement that was done at an earlier meeting. So we'll go right into disclosures. Any disclosure of pecuniary interests on the agenda as presented to you this evening? Hearing none, we'll have that duly noted. Thank you. The introduction of our meeting this afternoon is to hear public comment on housekeeping amendment to town zoning bylaws with respect to introduction of zoning regulations for additional residential units, also known as ARUs. I will call upon our manager of planning, Mr. Jeffries, to bring any report forward and certainly explain what we're doing this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council will remember that upon approval of the new official plan last year, new policies were introduced permitting additional residential units or ARUs as of right. That was the first step in meeting the Planning Act requirements introduced through Bill 108 to permit these as of right. The next step is to introduce zoning regulations that would permit the ARUs in the various residential and agricultural zones and establish general zone provisions with respect to things such as setbacks, maximum floor area, height, and servicing. And that's what we're here tonight to do, Mr. Mayor, is to introduce those and to hear from anybody who's any interested stakeholders, whether they have any comments or not on the proposed provisions. The town has begun to initiate a new zoning bylaw that's scheduled to be completed in 2023. But rather than wait for that bylaw to be finalized to incorporate ARU provisions, and given the recent demand for ARUs and the provincial expectation that they be permitted as of right, it was believed a more prudent approach to introduce regulations through a housekeeping amendment to the town's 3 existing zoning bylaws. Since the official plan approval, Council has dealt with site-specific ARU proposals on 5 different properties. And these ARU proposals sort of covered the entire spectrum of the various types that you can expect to see throughout the town, including ARUs both within an existing dwelling or as part of an accessory structure, and both within the residential and agricultural area. And those public meetings allowed the town and council to evaluate ARUs and to vet them through a public process. We also conducted a survey of regional municipalities and their regs, as well as municipalities throughout Ontario. And this helped to inform the establishment of the townwide draft ARU zoning regulations that are before council for consideration tonight. And those are contained in attachment 1 on the report. And if we could go to attachment 1, I'm not going to go through this table in great detail, but as you can see, it's structured such that there's the regulation on the left, the column to the left, and it includes things like permitted use, location setbacks, size and height, municipal services, parking and access, and other requirements, and how each of those regulations pertain to the different types of ARU scenarios, such as those that are attached within existing buildings or dwellings in residential zones, those that are in standalone ARUs in residential zones, and in agricultural zones for both attached ARUs and standalone ARUs. So just wanted to highlight the permitted use row and note that the proposed provisions will allow for an attached ARU in a residential zone within single units, semi-detached, and townhouse dwellings. With respect to a standalone ARU, they will be permitted if they're associated with a single unit detached and semi-detached dwelling, but not for a townhouse scenario. In the agricultural zone for an attached ARU, they're permitted as of right, but there'll be 1 ARU per property, a maximum of 1. And then to have a standalone ARU within the agricultural zone, it will be subject to a site-specific rezoning, just like the one that was subject of the public meeting prior to this. So Just to summarize, if an ARU, a property within a residential zone, wants to, it can have both an ARU within the existing dwelling and as within a detached accessory structure. So there could be two ARUs within a residential zone. The balance of the regulations are there in the tables. And again, I won't go through them in detail, but if council has any questions pertaining to them, I'd be happy to answer those questions. Mr. Mayor, we're proposing that this table be implemented into the zoning bylaws of the three former municipalities that currently apply to the town. And those are my comments. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions that council has.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to Chad. I really don't have any questions. I think proceeding this way and incorporating it within our existing bylaws makes complete sense. And I do like the way that we've split the requirements for residential and agricultural within this graph. I think it'd be very helpful for anybody out there who is considering or looking at incorporating these into their property. It's a easy and quick illustration of, you know, what's required, what you can and can't do. But it just makes sense to me, given the as of right, I guess, provisions that the province has put on us. So it makes sense, and I'm happy to, you know, move it when required.
All right, thank you very much, Councilor Houston. I certainly agree with your comments, and I really think that there's tremendous opportunities here. Aging parents, disabled children, and many where it's been something that's even in our own municipality, a lot of folks have been asking, you know, the ability for them to be able to deal with that. The only comment, or not a comment, but a question too, is that in particular with on the communication piece, is that we did receive, and the one from ERCA, and I take of interest, is the explanation of land subject to limitations identified in a provincial policy statement. And they give the example: natural hazards and or areas subject to natural heritage should not be deemed appropriate to contain additional residential units. Having said that, and you probably are aware where I'm going with this, but in particular with one ARU that was identified on Les Moss Road, which was, you know, it came to council, it was deemed proper and so forth. And it was because of floodplain. And so the natural hazards, are they referring to floodplains? Are they, you know, and the rationale why I'm trying to, you know, want to know exactly what they're thinking, because the municipality went to lengths to purchase a vehicle and spent in the neighborhood, I think, of 160,000 in order for us to deal with flood issues. And then we have changed zoning, and there's 24 units are being built further north of the said unit, and with actual below grade apartments, and they're okay. And so in that regard, so we've been able to have communications with them, and in particular, I don't want to be in a position that when we have, I think what we're doing here, I think is the right thing. I think it's important, and I think in terms of having these come repetitively here makes no sense. You know, I think it should be left to a planning department in that regards, because obviously the groundwork's laid out and everything's there. But there could be, obviously, from residents some pushback if some can do it and some can't because of permitting issues from ERCA.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that question. There are two issues related to hazard lands that ERCA is referring to in its correspondence. One being the safe access in a storm event within the Lake St. Clair flood prone area, and the other with respect to minimum elevations of buildings. So with respect to the former, we've adopted a plan and we've purchased the deep water vehicle, and it's administration's position that we've addressed that hazard policy to the extent that's necessary. With respect to flood elevations, that applies to any development throughout the municipality that's subject to the IRCA regulations, and proponents will have to go to IRCA to acquire a permit if they're within that regulated area. Now, we are considering adding to the regulatory environment surrounding ARUs a provision that says that the proponents will have to get a permit from the Conservation Authority to ensure that that is something that is capable of that the proponent's capable of doing. So just for clarity, although they're currently subject to that provision with respect to minimum flood or minimum elevations of the building, to make it clear to a proponent seeking to establish an ARU, whether it's within a building or whether it's detached, that they will require a permit from IRCA if they're within the regulated area.
And on that, I mean, obviously, when this home in particular was built, I think when elevations were set at 575 and so forth. So, and it's a habitable area within the home. All I'm trying to get some clarity is a consistency in evaluating where they can and cannot. And I think this is kind of an area where I don't call it gray area, whatever, should they be grandfathered and so forth. I mean, in that regards, I think that aspect of it, we need a little bit more clarity in terms and consistency in the permitting. I don't disagree that it shouldn't, the format as you alluded to, I think is the right approach. But to make sure that it's consistent and because I don't see that certainly at this stage here. And I think there should be a little bit more clarity and discussions with IRCA in particular on the ARU, the one at 2 something, I think 270, I forget the address itself, but versus the new development. I mean, that I can see elevation, they're building new homes, has to be X. And we put all the provisions in the municipality with the high water rescue and so forth. But then there's existing opportunities that folks might be non-eligible. And we are allowing ARUs being constructed right on the waterfront. And so that's all I'm saying is at some point in your dialogue with IRCA is just to find some consistency in their decision.
And if I may, Mr. Mayor, prior to coming back to council with a draft zoning bylaw amendment for its consideration, we will have further meetings with IRCA and ensure that there's clarity brought to that issue and incorporated into the proposed amendment.
I don't know, Mr. Hillman, is there anything you want to add?
Mr. Mayor, only thank you. And I was going to add what Chad just added at the end. And I think you've hit it on the head. Where we have new buildings being constructed, it's slightly easier for them to achieve the minimum opening elevation issue. And I understand what you're saying. There are some cases where homes were built under a prior minimum opening elevation that are now being adversely affected in terms of putting an ARU into we'll call it the basement unit. Basement area, so to speak. So we need some clarity from IRCA on that. And the challenge always becomes at the end of the day in the regulated area, they hold the last permit and we can't issue our permit until their permit's been issued. So it creates that domino effect of frustration. So we will ensure that at a bare minimum, that at least we can bring back some clarity. Knowing that there are probably some circumstances where the elevation issue is going to adversely affect some of the conversion of existing singles to introduce an ARU in the lower portion of the unit.
Fair enough. Go ahead, Councillor Altenhoff.
Thank you, Worship. And through you, I just briefly want to echo your point because I honed in on that second, third last paragraph in Urca's correspondence. And I agree that we have to have consistency throughout. We have to kind of look at the history of other buildings and so forth in that area, and make sure that we are putting things in place, for the best benefit, of all. And that's really what I'm looking for. And I appreciate efforts that administration can undertake in reaching out with IRCA and really clarifying this, solidifying it quite well so that there's going to be no confusions, for our resident side, from IRCA's side, from the town administration side. Just make it very clear for all. Would be much appreciated. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Altenhoff. Nothing further than there are no delegations, I believe, to deal with this evening. If there's no further questions or certainly comments from us, then I'll go right to communications. And if I could have a motion to receive the two items of communications, please. Councillor Petrie and Councillor Altenhoff, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And also a motion to receive the report DS 2022-27 zoning bylaw amendment, additional residential units scheduling of a public meeting. Deputy Mayor Bichetti, Councillor Houston, thank you. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. And that if at this stage, no further questions or comments, then adjournment's in order. Councillor Altenhoff move, Councillor Tonio support, all in favor, opposed if any, that's carried. Thank you very much. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.